welcome to our very first episode of Beyond the Session, podcast brought to you by Reset Counseling and Psychotherapy in Barrie. That's our new brand. Our old name is Lindsay, Tsang and Associates. We're going for a fresh new look, and today I'm joined by Lindsay Tsang, founder and owner, and Andi Atkins, who is our longtime associates. I think you're probably one of the first associates that came here.
I think so. I've been here since 2017.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a small town, so we were neighbors for a while.
Yeah, that's true.
We'd catch you and your husband walking by for date night sometimes, or see each other around. Yeah, so I think life has evolved a little bit for both of us since then. I think we've both been growing our families and kind of evolving personally. From the time you started, I think you've seen a lot of changes in the practice, right?
And a lot more availability of mental health resources. A lot of people have had their benefits plan expand to include psychotherapy, which is...
Right. Well, I mean, when we started, the College of Psychotherapy was new.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of insurance companies.
It wasn't really a thing yet, right? Mm-hmm. But now it's starting to, people know what that is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there was also a lot of expansion of mental health services for some companies during COVID and working from home and everything like that.
You're right. Like the access to mental health resources has definitely expanded in a way that none of us could have ever seen coming. And obviously we don't wish the pandemic had happened, but here we are. And I think there are some good takeaways from it as far as what we can do in our field, right? And with our clients. Today we're exploring psychotherapy essentials. So the basics of psychotherapy, therapy 101 for new clients coming into the practice. And yeah, basically just walking them through what they're going to expect in their first session. I mean, I think it's nerve-wracking for clients, right? They know that something is off in their life, whatever that might be. They're having some kind of an issue. So they start getting curious. They're looking at therapy resources, maybe on Google, and our name pops up and they go, hey, I heard about those guys, or I drove by them on Esset Road and I'm curious about it. So then the journey of, that therapeutic alliance, which we'll talk about, it really starts, when they first see us on Google, right? Mm-hmm. And so then for some reason they're clicking on us, they're checking out our website. They say, okay, these guys look like they have their act together. Let's book a session. And then, they're reading through the profiles. And actually, Lindsay, I would love you to talk about the profiles and kind of the way that we build them and what our heart is behind those profiles.
Yeah. So I think when I first started, you would look for a therapist and the first thing that would pop up is Psychology Today. So everyone needed to have a profile on there. Back in the days when I started, it was just 3 pages of therapists. Now we have 11, 12 pages. People coming from different towns are on there because they're available for online therapy. So it's a crowded space. It was a crowded space and it's much more so now. So one of the things that I noticed on the profiles is that everyone would kind of put down all about accreditations they have, which of course is important because we want people who are actually trained for therapy. But there's very little heart behind it. Or there's all these kind of salesy pitches.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to make fun of anybody. But at least to me, right, it sounds like it's very hearts and trees and stuff like that. Which is very common in our industry, right? What I wanted to do, and this took me some time to hone down because I was trying to figure out what's going to set our practice apart, unique, right? Or what's the service that we're actually doing. I know that statistically, what provides success in therapy has very little to do with what kind of methods you use.
Absolutely.
Right? But actually a lot more about whether you trust or like your therapist.
Yeah.
So that's why I was thinking about how do we highlight our associates so their personalities shine through. People know who they are a bit, even before seeing them. Now that's really hard to do on just a bio, but I mean, we try.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of the heart behind why we wanted to craft our biographies to be a little bit more about heart, right? A little bit more about my journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Andi, that was a long time ago when you made your profile. But, kind of what was going through your head when you were making your profile was some of it about, connecting people to your personality or your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to shy away from using too much of the sort of jargon and abbreviations. There's a lot of that in our field. For me, the common foundation of my approach is that therapeutic relationship, right? It's having somewhere that you feel heard, that you feel safe, you know, that you're not going to be judged. And also, as Lindsay mentioned, I mean, it's very hard to convey that online, you know, in a paragraph, but sometimes making yourself vulnerable can make clients feel safe as well. In a story, I talk about how I was diagnosed with mental health conditions as a teenager, and that's something that I've been dealing with and managing in my life. And I found therapy personally to be very helpful, and that was a big part of my inspiration to become a therapist. So I like to put that out there because sometimes people really connect with that, and they say, "Hey, this is somebody that has literally been in my shoes as much as it's possible to be."
And not everybody likes to.
No.
Actually, we had pushback even within our practice, right? It's like, oh, I'm not sure, right? This is different. I've heard it from you before, I think, but other associates also have told me they're like, okay, I'm starting to trust this process a bit because people would come and say, I read your profile, and immediately said, this is the person I need to talk with, and so that's kind of what led to that connection afterwards.
Right, and there's a fine line there, right? Because obviously you want to give a little bit, but it's not really, I don't know, the therapy is about the client.
Right,
and their
it's not
needs.
about you as the therapist.
Right, I just want to say that. It's not about you, Andy. No, but like your story informs how you're going to approach your practice, right? So I think it's important for clients to have an idea that, you know, you've been there, you've got some empathy, it's lived experience for you, and that they can really trust that, you know, your best intentions are to meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those profiles a little bit more. So I think when I look at a Psychology Today profile, there's just like lists and lists of, you know, here's all the things that I provide counseling for: anxiety, depression, trauma. And I think the idea is so that, you know, there's tags for what you can expect from your therapist or how they can meet your needs. But then I think it can also be overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed. You know, I'm not going in as someone seeking therapy, and there's just a lot of abbreviations that I don't understand. What are some of those abbreviations? What are some of the ones that people come in asking you about that they are confused about? Can you talk to me about some modalities? There's a buzzword.
Sure. I mean, I think the first one that jumps to mind is CBT, which stands for Cognitive Behavior Therapy, and that's quite a popular one. I think it lends itself pretty well to, you know, a lot of insurance companies like those techniques.
Yeah, and it's mainstream.
Yeah, it's quite mainstream. It's one that some people have heard of, you know, just on social media or, you know, in like a TikTok or things like that. Like that's the one that people tend to be familiar with. That, and then sort of more stereotypical psychodynamic idea, right? Of like, tell me about your mother. Like I think a lot of people think that that's what therapy is, and like there can be little, I mean, obviously pieces of that.
I mean, one thing that people don't even know is what is a psychotherapist or what's a counselor, what's the difference between
what's a psychologist,
you know, that and the other. And I think the College of Psychotherapists, they were very vague in the beginning. We had no idea what a psychotherapist meant, right? Like what's it, like how can, you know, why can someone call themselves a counselor and the other person a psychotherapist, right? So I think later they defined it a little bit better, and what it sounded like to me is CBT, is cognitive behavioral therapy. Like basically that's what they protected as a practice of psychotherapy, is someone who's able to use cognitive behavioral therapy as someone who's a psychotherapist. So what is, and not everybody knows what that is, right? Like I remember, and maybe that's different because it was 8 years ago, but I walked into a lunch and learn with a bunch of physicians, and I said, hey, so I'm a therapist, like I help people with anxiety and depression, and they're like, how do you do that? And so I said, well, I use CBT, and they're like, tell me more about that. I don't know what it is, right? So I think my definition of CBT, which I actually stole from Tony Robbins, but he stole from CBT anyway. But it's he uses the terms state, story, and strategy, right? State of the body, the story you're telling yourself, and then what behaviorally you're going to do, strategy. So that's and I would call that one of the popularly used and evidence-backed. There's a lot of evidence for the effectiveness of it. Which is to, you know, what I would call a top-down approach. It's like a change your state, change your behavior, change the way you think, and then you'll get better, which is true. But it's only one of the angles.
Yeah, and I think part of the risk with CBT, and I mean as Lindsay says, it's quite effective, but part of the risk is it can sound a little simplistic. It can sound a little bit like, just think more positively or something like that, which it kind of is, but it's sort of going into the actual brain science, right? And how our brain makes these pathways that lead to these automatic thoughts and their associated feelings and behaviors. So we really don't mean to, oversimplify mental health either when we say that CBT is helpful. It's very hard work as well.
Right, and I think sometimes it can sound like I'm going to apply this recipe to you, right? Like, here's CBT, we're going to go through these 12 steps, and that's maybe what people expect walking in, is that you're going to CBT them. But what does that actually look like in a session?
So there might be a difference actually when it comes to our private practice versus, say, like a public service. Because the public service, that would be what they would offer. It would be a module almost, right? Like there's 8 to 12 sessions, and session to session is very structured. You know exactly what you're going to do, and as a CBT module.
I mean, a lot of our therapists are trained in that modality because you have to. Like, if you take your master's in counseling psychology, it's like 101. You have to do CBT, right? But what's kind of nice though about when you have a private practice, we have more flexibility with it. And so the way I usually explain to my clients is that it's almost like I have a toolkit. I have these different modalities and tools and methods that I have under my belt, but it takes wisdom to know when to pick out one or the other based on the situation, right? So we don't just smack down, this is what we're gonna do. We have to be able to feel it out with the relationship we have and based on your needs and where you're at and whether you like this modality or not, right? So that's one way of looking at one of the acronyms, CBT. Any other one you wanna touch on? Or
Well, I just wanted to add on to what you said, which is that using a flexible approach, right? So much of it is going to depend on the clients, what they value, right? What strengths they're bringing in, and even sort of what they're looking for in therapy, right? People have different goals. Some people really just need somewhere safe to be able to vent and be heard. Some people really want to go back into the past and sort of unpeel these layers of how they became who they became, or delve into some traumatic experiences, which is obviously like a more long-term process, right? Some people just they need to learn some skills, or they kind of need some guidance or support in maybe making a decision, or some people don't even know what they want, like you're saying, Kathy, they just want to feel better, they just want to feel different, and that's where, with the therapeutic relationship being that foundation, and then we can draw on these different tools and techniques.
I'm thinking of all these acronyms. DBT,
ACT.
Some people ask purposefully, they will email and say like, hey, I'm looking for someone with EMDR. But it is, EMDR is eye movement desensitization. What the R stands for, I forgot right now.
And reprocessing.
But it's a very structured modality. And so I'm saying this for the listener because I want you guys to hear what it is, right? And it is very effective. Again, it's evidence backed. We know that people with trauma are able to get better using it. So what I would like to do is to back up a little bit and talk briefly about trauma therapy in general. I've taken some training in different modalities for trauma, and I find that a lot of them are really just doing the same thing with different differentials. But they're really just doing the same thing, and it's a form of exposure therapy with the addition of the self-regulation. Okay, and so to give you guys some history, when PTSD was even discovered, it was probably from the World War, from Vietnam War. All these vets were coming back. They were, traumatized, clammed up, alcoholics, like all the things that they weren't willing to talk about. So these therapists back then didn't know what to do with them because they wouldn't talk. So they thought, they're not talking about what happened, so maybe we need to reenact what happened with them so that they would get talking, kind of shock them into talking about it again. And what happened was that they got worse instead, right? They got re-traumatized. And so this is something that I do hear as a complaint from some of my clients is that they've been to therapy in the past for their trauma, and that it was terrible because they would go there and the therapist was not trained for it, and they would say, "Well, tell us about it. Keep talking. The more you talk about it, the better." Right? And they were getting re-traumatized and getting worse. So that is very important. If you're as a listener, if you have any kind of traumatic experience you want to talk about, you have to make sure that your therapist is trained for it, specifically for trauma therapy, because it's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
Basically, all of the exposure therapy goes along something along the line of this. We're going to learn how to self-regulate the body. With these Vietnam vets, one therapist was saying, "This is not working. I'm going to use hypnosis." It gets them into a super relaxed spot, and then they start talking. And so there's a swing back and forth between super comfortable to I'm facing this uncomfortable thing for short periods of time, maybe 20 seconds. So EMDR is usually 20 seconds. I'm thinking really visually and viscerally about this situation, so it's super uncomfortable. Some people hate EMDR because it's way too uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can imagine.
20 seconds, but then it's more, it's timed, so you have to come back out, you have to process and just talk, and you do all the relaxation, and so you're kind of doing back and forth, and that's how people are healing drastically sometimes from their trauma.
Right, because that's actually doing something in our brain, right? When we're going from a relaxed state, and then we're actually able to consider a traumatic event from that relaxed state, right? Like there's actually something in our wiring.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the sympathetic dominance. Sympathetic dominance would be the the same state you get into if you're driving a go-kart really fast around corners, right? Your heart rate's going up, 50 different hormones going through your bloodstream, and now your natural behaviors in that state is to fight or to run away, right? Fight, flight, or shut down altogether. That's the freeze, right? And so with these kind of modalities, we're just kind of massaging that, right? It's like taking a spring. If you just too quickly just pull it, it's gonna break, right? So we have to massage it. We have to slowly ebb and flow, go into it, but come back out, go back into it, and come back out. And that's how you're able to, your brain is now starting to make those connections. So one of my supervisors told me this way. He says that your brain has two sides. One is good for timestamps, and the other one is good for experiential, or sensory, right? And so what's happening with someone who's traumatized is that those two parts got separated. And now whenever any trigger comes up, it's almost like I'm living it again, and I'm there right now. And so what these kind of modalities are doing is actually helping those two sides connect with each other.
To reintegrate.
So now when I think about that horrible situation, it's in the past. It's not happening to me right now. I think the point though is just picking up another one of these modalities that are popular, EMDR. Absolutely, I think if someone is trained for it and that's exactly the modality you want to use, it is effective, but it's uncomfortable. There's benefits to it. Is that most people do get better using it, but the sessions itself can be very intense. But I wouldn't completely just hone in on it has to be this modality. Like I think if someone has different methods, like internal family systems is another one, we can get into that. Or they have trauma-informed psychotherapy, like they have training for that. They understand that you have to do this back and forth, and that it's not just all exposure.
Right. I think some people think that it's kind of like that old school thinking of that, just talking about the trauma. It's like, oh, it's just letting the poison out, and then you can heal from it.
Right.
But it's kind of repoisoning yourself, right? If you're so I think it's important as well for clients to know, and I mean not even just clients who are coming in to deal with trauma, but with anything. The client is in charge, right? The client is the expert on their own experience. The therapist is not, in that sense, the therapist is not the expert. The therapist is the psychotherapy expert who's there to work with the client. Like it really is a joint venture, and it's it's important to be checking in with clients as well, and we do frequently to make sure that this is okay. Yeah.
Well, and I agree with you completely. It is a joint venture, and you have to pay attention, right? You have to ask, is this working for you? Is this too uncomfortable? Like, we have to check in on that. On the other hand, though, like I think part of why people, you know, they want a trained psychotherapist is that because we do have these structures or frameworks that I might not know about if I was not, you know, in the education for it.
Let's go back to the person who's looking at the Psychology Today profile, right? They're trying to find the right therapist, and they see that, oh, everyone has CBT, and, you know, half of the people have EMDR, and half the people have DBT. So when you're looking at that list, like, does it really tell you about your therapist, or how much can you actually, you know, put trust in that or put faith in that?
Yeah, sure. I always tell clients right off the bat in our first session, you know, when I'm sort of explaining about therapy and the fact that there are literally hundreds of modalities, and, you know, I like to combine techniques from a few of them based on the client's needs. But that is all contingent on the therapeutic relationship. So a lot of the time, I mean, the first session is really just to get a sense of, do I click with this therapist? Are we a good match? And it's not even necessarily the same thing as like liking them or thinking that they're competent or, you know, thinking that they're nice or something like that. Like those might be parts of it, but it really is, sometimes you have to just have that conversation to see, okay, we're vibing here, versus, you know what, maybe I'm gonna try a different therapist and just see if you know, we're more compatible in that sense. But I find usually within a session or two, you can get, clients seem to be able to get a good sense of like, okay, I'm willing to continue with this therapist versus I need to maybe try somebody else.
For sure. And that's something we tell clients all the time.
Yes.
Let me give you a little insight into our hiring process. When we have people come in, we're interviewing, the number one thing we're looking for is a therapist who is likable, someone who is warm, right? Like, obviously their credentials matter. We need them to be well trained and professional. We need them to have that toolkit nice and full so that they can, you know, meet clients wherever they're at and not feel stuck or on the spot. But we do want that warmth and that vibe, right? And I don't know, I think maybe this sounds rude, but some people have it and some people don't. Would you agree with that, Lindsay?
Okay, well, I think I think that for sure, I think some people they're going to struggle, to be honest, in their career as a therapist, especially in a private setting, just because of their ability to hold themselves.
Right, because, sorry, I'm going to cut you off for a second, but for example, we've had people interview who, you know, they've gone through every level of schooling, they have, you know, 50 different modalities that they can offer, and then when it comes to interview time, we're talking to them and they just maybe don't have the people skills, they're very academically driven, right?
Yeah, like can't look me in the eye. I like to do personality profiles, as you know, right? And I think that there are different types of therapists that might be a better fit for different types of people.
Yes.
Right? You know, some people who are really direct, they want to get straight to the point and solve your problems. Maybe that's what you need, right? I would say that probably you and I are more in the camp of like, we're passionate, we can talk, we're good at using analogies and ideas, right? And some people really connect with that. And some people are very nurturing, you know, they really slow down and hear you out, they're in tune with you. And then we have the people who are very academic, they're very smart, they know the processes really well, they know all the theories, and some people actually need that. With the Reset Therapy brand moving forward, we are moving more and more towards kind of the types that more like you or I. And it's not to say that it's the only kind of therapist that is good, but it's to say that that's just more the kind of field we're going for. And so when people come, they know what to expect, right?
Yeah. I actually had a client telling me that they went to see their family doctor and, you know, we're mentioning, oh, I'm going to counseling, I really like my counselor sort of thing. And then the doctor was like, you're not supposed to like your counselor.
Really?
Yeah, like the doctor was like basically saying like, it's a cop out, like you're not supposed to like your therapist sort of thing. And and I mean, my client was not happy to hear that, and she's like, no, it is important I like my therapist, or I'm not going to feel safe, I'm not going to, you know, do the work. And the nature of my client's personality, she's not somebody who, you know, wants somebody to be kind of like
a drill sergeant?
That's a better word for it than I was going to use.
Well, So let's talk about the therapeutic alliance a little bit more. So, I mean, we're kind of taking a journey of how the client gets from their couch into our office, right? And so, you know, they've read through the profiles, they've overlooked all the jargon, they've managed to get past it. They book an appointment, they get through all the intake forms. You know, there's a lot of hurdles that they have to overcome to get into your chair, right? If there was something that you could tell them before they even come in the door, if there was just like a little message you could leave on their phone, what would you tell them if it's their first time accessing service?
I mean, it's totally normal to be nervous and to not know what to expect.
Yeah.
And it's okay if you don't have, I mean, obviously we hope, especially if you're coming here, that you are having a great experience right off the bat and building those therapeutic alliances, but it's normal and okay, and it doesn't reflect badly on you in any way if that doesn't happen, if you do need to go to a few different therapists just to try it out. And even being willing to make that step is huge, and that bodes really well for the client, because they obviously, you know, they are resourceful, they are brave, they are willing to reach out for help. So that means they're already bringing a lot of strengths into the therapy room, and I want them to know that as well, because I think a lot of people when they come in are feeling like I'm, you know, maybe they're not feeling at their best or very strong, but being willing to come here is strength in itself, I think.
It is, yeah. And do you think a lot of people feel like they're coming to an expert who's going to fix things for them?
I think sometimes, and sometimes we do have to sort of, you know, help people adjust their expectations, right? Because we don't have any, you know, magic, you know, fixes or cures or anything like that. I mean, those aren't even really the words I think that we would use to talk about what we do.
Right.
But it's normal to want that. It's completely normal and human and understandable to want that quick fix.
Well, and people come in with different hopes too, and that's why that's part of the first session is to know, you know, well, what is it, right? Like, and some people would say that, well, obviously I want to feel better, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, well,
what does that look like?
Let's measure that.
Let's
measure that. Let's talk about what that would look like, right? I think that I kind of joke with people when they come in. I'm like, hey, have you been to therapy before? And they're like, no. Like, yeah, so it probably doesn't look like what it looks like on TV. Because I cringe every time I see those those guru moments on the TV, the therapist.
Right.
And it's like, no, it's not really like that. And I will explain a little bit about, you know, the therapeutic alliance. I won't even use those words, right? But like basically, you know, the research shows that you kind of, the best indicator of if this is going to be helpful for you is whether you like or trust your therapist. And so if you don't like me for whatever reason, right? I don't know, my breath's too stinky. I don't know what you, right? I talk too much, right? Well, if you don't like me, this probably won't work, right? If you are feeling that way, I probably won't have anything to offer you, right? And that's fine. And you have to find someone that you're going to trust, right?
And we don't take it personally as therapists either. If it's not the right fit, right?
Yeah.
We will often refer to one of our colleagues. Sometimes even just from talking with a client, we'll have a sense of, you know what, maybe this would go really well with, you know, my colleague so and so. It's not even a wasted session really, because then you get a sense of like, okay, this is one type of therapist, and I maybe don't want to pursue that direction.
Sometimes we tell people that it's a little bit like dating.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that?
Don't date your therapist.
Yeah.
That is not allowed.
That's unethical.
But it's a part where you're checking out people's profiles, you're watching their videos, you're listening to their voice, you're trying to see if you have a little bit of like common ground with them.
Yeah, connection there.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the point of this podcast, right? We wanted people to get a chance to hear the voices in a very, I don't know, I hope this is kind of natural, right? Like we're just chatting.
Yeah, less formal.
Yeah, setting, so that people can get a sense of who you are just by listening, right? And hopefully some of these video captures we can use too, and we can put on the website, and people have a better carousel of like different medias to have a sense of who their therapist is before coming in. And I think I hope that's going to increase the chances of good connections and good client and therapist alliances, which leads to better performance really, in terms of getting better.
Yeah, that makes sense. And even that opportunity for the client to start building the relationship on their end to an extent before they come in, or you know, to find maybe there will be something throughout this podcast series that like resonates.
No, Andi, I want to talk to you about the therapeutic alliance. So, I mean, we're talking about from the client's perspective why it's important to have a good therapeutic alliance. But what about as a counselor? Like, how important is it to you that you have people coming through the door that, you know, that you can really speak to, connect with, you feel like they read your profile and they just kind of get you? How important is that to you?
I mean, if somebody is coming in and they, you know, haven't read my profile, don't know anything about me, I mean, that's totally okay too. It's not going to be like a quiz or anything. But I mean, I think it definitely adds something if it's somebody who, you know, there was a line, you know, maybe in my profile or something about me that they resonated with, because that is already building that common ground. Yeah, I mean, I think on mine it's kind of the same thing with the therapeutic alliance, because a client, if they can't trust you, you know, if they can't open up to you, I mean, as a therapist, that makes your job very, very difficult, if not impossible, right? I mean, we're not mind readers. So I think as a therapist, like also having that connection, you kind of get a better sense of how much the person is participating and engaging in the process and how to best help them.
Yeah, I think I'm referring a little bit to, I mean, I think you have a bit of a niche in our company. So there's like a certain type of client that I would send towards you, right? And is it your hope that you would kind of always attract that type of client, or do you like the variety of clients that you see?
I mean, I do like the variety, but I really like the majority of it, I think, to be that sort of, you know, teenagers, young adults, that age group, you know, that I was in when I first started dealing with mental health issues, and that a lot of people are in when those issues come out. I'm still trying to keep up to date on all the, you know, TikTok and Snapchat and what all the kids are up to these days, which is, I guess, part of my continuing education, right? Is just knowing what's going on with, you know, with teenagers and social media and stuff. But I think also, you know, being younger maybe makes me more approachable. So I don't know what that looks like if I get older and suddenly I'm, you know, not seen as like so much of like a peer, but like an authority figure.
Sure.
I remember one of my clients, he's like trying to show, he's like, you don't have Snapchat? This is how it works, right? He's like, for like a few minutes in the session, he's just showing me how Snapchat works, or like what's the lingo behind it, or things like that. So it's, there's already a generational gap, right, between me and some of the younger guys or clients that come in.
Absolutely.
So, like, so I think that's part of why we, you know, again, in Bruise at Therapy, we're looking for the in the personality profile, I call it the high influencer people. So these are the people who are ideas people, who are usually pretty confident in a social setting, and so these are the kind of people who are really easily versatile, adapting between people and people, right? Because we're interested in people. Right? We're a high energy people person. So that's part of the strength of our style, is that it doesn't really matter what kind of people come in. Usually we're able to connect pretty quickly.
And there's that genuine curiosity there.
There's a curiosity, right? If I'm not like you, then tell me why you're like that, right? So
and if we don't understand something, it often is like please, like, teach me this, help me understand this.
So that in that sense, like, it doesn't, you know, it's not a huge barrier in terms of how much do I like the client, I guess. We wouldn't tell you, by the way.
But you would know.
I don't know.
Things therapists are not allowed to say. You like all your clients equally, right?
Well, I think that you would feel it. I mean, you wouldn't know because you haven't sat in other therapist, you know, rooms, right? But if there's I've had clients before where it's like, oh, it's almost a pity that you're my client, because I can see how we would have been really good friends otherwise, right? Or if I would have heard that the other way too. But of course, that's not the point, right? We are still a service, and the whole point is that we're a professional that's removed from your circles, so that you can freely talk about whatever you need to. And the moment we become your friend, at least outside of the setting of the therapeutic alliance, then that defeats the point, right?
And it's not allowed.
And it's not allowed.
And it's not allowed.
And it's not allowed.
But it's not allowed for very good reasons.
For good reasons. Yeah.
Conflict of interest. There are rules. Okay, well, we're coming to a close, but before we do, I just want to know what kind of spiel you give to your client in their first session about how long is this process going to take, and what are we going to do after this? I'm telling you my story, but what are we going to do about it? What is it that you tell to your clients to set their expectation for this journey that they're going to take with you?
You know, there are a small number of clients who are coming in that really will say right off the bat that they really just need like a session or two. They have to get something off their chest, or they have like a very discrete sort of issue to deal with. More frequently, clients are coming in and they have no sense of how long it's going to be, or they already are having a sense that this is going to be, you know, sort of a long-term thing. I mean, I don't really give like a number of sessions or anything like off the bat. I will tell clients that I usually like to start off with either weekly or every other week sessions. That's just to continue, you know, building that relationship, get some momentum, and then over time, as people start to feel better, we space it out. You know, maybe every 3 weeks, every month, every few months, just sort of like as a checkpoint. And I mean, so much of it really depends on what the client's goals are, which, like I said, sometimes in the first session, they don't even know what it is. They just need to, you know, we just need to talk for a little bit and get some information and kind of figure out, okay, what direction are we moving in from here? It's very collaborative in that sense. And then of course I give them my spiel that I've been repeating a little bit today about the fact that, you know, there are so many therapeutic approaches, and I try to be flexible and just really build that strong relationship with the client and help them feel safe and non-judged, and just try to be warm and connect with them.
Yeah, I think, you know, I have a pretty intuitive, now that I've been doing it for a while, my first session, I don't have to have it planned out straight because it just comes out that way usually. But a lot of it is just getting to know you questions, and I tell them that, right? First session, today's just to get to know you, right? And so I would ask a series of questions, and at the end I would say, do you have any questions for me, right? And sometimes people really do. They want to know my age or whatever, and I'm like, that's good. That's part of the trust building, right? And most people say, no, I have no idea what to ask you.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, that's great. In my style though, is that after hearing you now, I'm pretty good at this on the spot, so I'm able to kind of be like, okay, from what I'm hearing, here's what I think could happen in sessions, and so I might lay out a few tools or things or directions that is possible.
Yeah.
And I would tell them that, and then I'll say, like, you know, this is we don't have to do any of this. We can do all of it, and I'm not sure. We will find out as we go. You know, I want to give you a sense that there is a direction we can take if you have no idea, because some clients come in and they have no idea what to expect. And I said sometimes people come in and they just say, I know exactly what I want. I just need to unload this thing. No problem. That's what we're here for as well. I agree with you. I would typically say, but let's do this regularly. Because otherwise we're not building that momentum. More and more I'm using the analogy of the physiotherapist, because I went recently. And so I went to the physiotherapist, and my lower back was hurting, and he told me to do some child poses. And it's like, come on, I know I should have done child poses, but because he prescribed to me that I had to do it 3 times a day, you know, 2 sets, I did it, and my back got better, right? But then I had to regularly meet up with him to check in and to keep accountable, and to also redirect if necessary, to do the actions or the behaviors or the thoughts that help me get better, right? So yeah, therapy is a little bit like that. People gone from 2 sessions gone to being with me for a year or 2 years, and it's just totally dependent on what they need. But I would start off at least usually on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, and then kind of phase out when they're getting better.
Lindsay and Andi, thanks for coming in today and joining us on Beyond the Session, our very first podcast brought to you by Reset Therapy in Barrie, Ontario. If you have any questions that you would like us to address in this podcast, we would love to hear from you. You can send your questions to resetbarrie@gmail.com.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you next time.